Personal finance practice problem using Excel. Calculate APR and payment for a home loan. Prepare to get financially fit by practicing personal finance. Here we are in our Excel worksheet. If you have access to the Excel worksheet, would like to follow along, note that we're down here in the practice tab as opposed to the example tab. The example tab in essence being an answer key. We have the information on the left-hand side. We're going to populate that into the blue area on the right-hand side. Looking at our loan scenarios, we're going to first do the loan without considering any added fees that would be involved in it, calculating the interest rate and the APR being the same then as the interest rate. Then we'll add to the fees to it so we can consider the impact of the APR, which in essence rolls in together all the costs of the loan into one number that we can then use as comparisons with other loans, remembering that when you're thinking about loans, there's a couple different ways that they could twist things around on you. So when you make the comparisons, it can get somewhat difficult. And our job, of course, is to untwist that or to put the numbers in some way that we can make accurate comparisons. So one way they could do that is we can represent the interest rate in terms of yearly rates, or they could try to represent an interest rate in terms of something other than a yearly rate. Now, typically, when you're thinking about home loans, they will represent the interest rate on a yearly term, typically, even though you're making monthly payments. So doing the calculation, we got to take that into consideration. But when we do a side-by-side comparison, that should be fairly straightforward. The other kind of component is this idea of having costs that are in addition to the cost of the rent of the loan, which would be the interest. And those costs could vary. And then the question is, well, how do I make a comparison between two loans that have different cost structures, one in which they just put the higher rate of the loan possibly, and the other which has a lower rate, but possibly more costs that could be included in it. And the way we want to do that is try to think about the APR generally, which will give us a comparable number, although even then, we need to be careful with regards to how long the loan will be in terms of how important or how, whether or not that could still lead us astray. So let's start off with these two calculations. Let's do it in Excel. Now, you do have online calculators that can help you out with this as well. I like to use the online calculations as a guide to double check the numbers that we do in Excel, because within Excel, it really helps you if you can basically run the calculation and then run the table for it yourself, because I think that gives you a better comprehension of what's going on. Double check it with the online calculators. So we're going to start off with the scenario with no closing costs. So we have the loan of $100,000. We're going to say there's no closing costs. So we'll just have the general rate will be the APR of the 7%. We're going to say it's a straight 30-year fixed loan, making monthly payments to repayment. Payments are monthly payments. So then we can think then about the number of periods. The number of periods would be straightforward in that we have 30 years and we're going to be making the payments monthly. So I'm going to take the 30 up top times the 12. That would be 360 periods. Now, typically we'll be calculating the payment, and we'll probably be doing this when we're making comparisons and would like to be able to do this kind of comparison for multiple different scenarios. And so you want to be able to calculate the payment rate. And again, it's really nice to do this in Excel because you can do nice side-by-side comparisons and change things like the interest rate quite quickly. So this would be the payment calculation, payment for the no costs calculation. I just like to flip the sign by putting a negative instead of equal. So I'm going to put a negative to start it out, and that'll just cause it to be a positive number. That's not exactly, you're supposed to put the negative within the formula somewhere, but I think when I can do it this way, I prefer to do it this way. So I'm going to put negative PMT, shift, there's the payment function. I'm going to say shift 9. And note that we've seen some of these calculations before when we looked at present value and future value calculations. So if you would like to see how this kind of ties into present value, future value calculations and just understand those concepts more, go back, take a look at that section. So we'll do this a little bit faster here. The rate then is going to be that 7%, but that's the yearly rate. Here's the tricky component. We got to take that divided by 12 because they're going to give us the yearly rate, but we're doing our calculations on a monthly period basis. Then comma, we got the number of periods. Now you could put the 30 times 12, or we already did that calculation to get 360, and then comma, the present value represents the loan amount that we're going to have in this case. So we're going to say the loan amount because there's no closing costs, so it's just the loan amount. You could take the loan amount plus the closing costs, which are going to be componented or rolled into the loan. So I'm going to say enter, and that's going to give us our payment amount of the $665.30. So if I then do a running balance, which I highly recommend doing when you can, although it's a long running balance, because again, it gives you a better grasp of what's going on. And you can also do some calculations on a year-to-year basis, how much interest you're going to be paying, and so on and so forth. This is also much better to do in Excel when you can, because it's a lot easier to then add up the interest on a yearly basis and so on and so forth than an online calculator. So I can then say, okay, what if I had 1, 2 periods, or let's start at 0, 0, 1, 2. I'm going to select those 3 cells, put my cursor on the fill handle, left click on it, drag it all the way down. I got to go all the way down to 360 payments. Not too difficult though, because why? Excel. That's why. So then we go to the Home tab, Alignment and Center, and the payment. Well, let's put the loan balance first at period 0, which is just going to be the 100,000. So we'll have the 100,000. The payment is going to be equal to this 665.30. I'm going to make that an absolute reference by selecting F4 on the keyboard, $ before the E and 1. You only need a mixed reference, but an absolute reference works. Then I'm going to pick up the interest calculation, which will be equal to the 100,000 balance times, we're going to pick up the rate, which is that 7% on the left. I want to make that an absolute reference so I can copy it down. F4 on the keyboard, $ before the B and 3. You only need a mixed reference, but an absolute will work. Divided by, key point, divided by 12, because that's the yearly rate, and we're looking at a monthly payment. And there we have it. So if we're then have a payment of 665, about 665.30 minus the interest of about 583, the loan reduction is going to go down. The loan balance will go down by $82. Therefore, our new loan balance will be equal to 100,000 minus the $82, giving us 99,918 about. Let's do it one more time, and then we'll copy it down. The payment's going to be equal to this one up top. I'm going to say F4 on the keyboard, absolute reference, so we can copy it down. Interest now will be slightly different, possibly due to the fact that the balance is now at 99,918 instead of 100,000, times the rate of 7%. Selecting F4 on the keyboard, making it an absolute reference, $ before the B and 3. Then we're going to subtract these two out. Whoop, hold on a second. Notice that's the interest for a year, and I need to now divide it by 12. So I'm going to take that second number, B3, the 7%, divided by 12, and now we've got the amount 583. It doesn't look like it's any difference, but it's slightly different due to the fact that we have this change in the balance. That difference will become quite apparent as we copy it down. So we're going to take the payment minus the 583 about, and now we're going to take the prior balance, the 99,918 minus the 82. Let's go ahead and copy this down for the 360 payments, selecting these cells, putting our cursor on the autofill handle. Now note, since we already have kind of the table laid out, you can just double click this instead of dragging it down. Double click, and then you still want to go down and kind of check it and go down and say, the last number should be 0. I still kind of like dragging it down because I go down there anyways, and I kind of like the suspense of keeping the last one at 0. But in any case, it's at 0. You could see then the interest is going down to nothing, and you can see the payments, the amount that's going to be the reduction in the principal going up as you make the payment. So this gives you that nice breakout of what's actually happening on a year-by-year basis. Now, if you were to calculate this in an online calculator, here's just a fairly simple online calculator just to check it. You got the 100,000, the 30%, 7% on the loan. I'm going to say there's no fees, which I'm going to put 0.01 just so they let me calculate it with something here. So then we've got the amount financed, 100,000 and a penny. And then we've got the payments, the 665.30, which I think that matches what we got here, right? 665.30. And then you've got the total of the 360 payments to 239,508, which is a nice number to have. Let's see if we add this whole payments up, adding up all the payments then, which you could just take the 665 so on times 360 equals the SUM. Let's add a total column down here, totaling up this entire thing. All the way up to the top, we're going to totally total it. And it's going to be almost there, almost there, almost there. And there we have it, and enter. Let's copy this across, putting our cursor on that fill handle, dragging it. And this is going to be the totals. And let's go ahead and make that blue. Make it fancy looking, fancy, colorful, fancy. So there we have it. And so it doesn't make sense to have a total here. That doesn't make sense. So there's the $239,509 on the total. So there we have that. So $239,509, and the total interest we pay, the $139,508, $139,508, and so on. So you can kind of check it to your calculator. But notice here, this is a nice way to have it, because then I can change my percent and say, well, what if it was like 9%? What if it was 5%? And I can get my nice quick calculations, which is a little bit more difficult to do on the online calculator. And you can also get your payments per year, adding up your interest per year quite quickly, instead of just having the total interest and so on. So you have a lot more flexibility if you can do this stuff in Excel. But in any case, let's now compare it. And now we have the loan we're saying is the $100,000. Now we're imagining that's how much we need in order to finance the purchase of the home, and it's going to cost us another $1,000 in order to get the loan going. So that means that basically what's going to happen is we're going to have to be paying back $101,000, right? We need $100,000 upfront to pay for the home. Then we need another $1,000 in order to pay for the financiers, who are just going to take that money up front, and we're going to have to pay it back along with the loan over the 30-year time period. So now we're going to say, okay, well, if I'm just going to fold that closing cost into the cost of the loan, I'm not really paying 7%, because that $1,000 is kind of a cost. These two things are costs. So in other words, when I pay back the loan, I'm actually going to be paying back something at $101,000. But what I need to know is basically, how can I compare a comparable percent number to another loan that might have a different mix between the closing fees and the interest. So we'll kind of break this out and see if it makes more sense as we do this. So that we'll get the APR, obviously, is what we'll calculate. So we're going to say the period in months, once again, is going to be 30 years times the 12 months, or 360, same as we saw before. Now I'm going to calculate the PMT with costs. So in other words, I need to know what my payment is, now that the fact that I'm not going to be repaying just $100,000, but I got to repay $101,000 now, due to the fact that I'm going to need to finance another $1,000 to pay for the loan itself. So we'll calculate the payment, similar formula, PMT, shift 9. We've got the rate is going to be 7%, but that would be for a year. So we take that divided by 12, comma. The number of periods would be the 30 times 12, or 360, which we'll just pick up down below, comma. And the present value is going to be the $100,000 loan cost plus the $1,000 fees that we're going to have. So that'll be the $101,000. That's where the difference is from the last item that we had. That would give us the $671.96. Now that gives us a nice thing for our payment, because we can then kind of compare this payment to another payment, but it doesn't give us something that we can really compare in terms of total costs on a percentage type of basis, which is what we would kind of like to see comparing. In other words, I can use this number now just to calculate out my amortization table, for example, and that would be same kind of thing. I'd say 0, 1, 2, and then I'd copy that down using our autofill, selecting those 3 cells, dragging that down, 360 payments, down 360, centering it, alignment and center, balance. Then starting off with, we're going to say, balance is starting off with the 100,000 plus the 1,000, or 101,000 instead of 100,000 last time. The payment is then going to be this $671.96. Enter. Let's make that an F4 actually before I hit enter. Should have done it before. F4 $ before the Q and 1. Interest calculation would be now the 101,000 times the 7%. Now I'm going to make that absolute F4 on the keyboard, $ before the N and 3, divided by 12 to make it a monthly amount instead of yearly. Subtracting these two out, we're going to say this is equal to the 672 about 671.96 minus The 589 gives us about a reduction of 83. And did I I'm going to double click. I did. Okay. I'm checking myself here. Then I'm going to say this equals the 101 minus the 83. If I then copy that down, I'm going to select these 4 cells. I'm simply going to double click on the autofill handle, and it should take it all the way down. I'll double check it. Going down to the last payment, we should be at 0 at the end of it, which gives us some confirmation that we're back at 0 down here. Let's go ahead and total these up. I'm going to copy these cells. I'm just going to copy them so I have the same formulas and just total these up. So you can see the totals down here at the 239 versus the 241, the 139 versus the 140 on the totals over the 360 periods. So we have that, but I'd also like to calculate and roll that into a percentage number. So we're going to call this, I'm going to make this an AP, this is going to be the APR monthly, okay. And then I'm going to use a rate calculation to do this. So this is going to be equal to the rate calculation, brackets, the number of periods. The number of periods, once again, is 30 times 12, or just pick up the 360 down here, comma. The payment now is the one we just calculated right up above it, so we're using that payment, comma. And then here's kind of the tricky part. We're using the larger payment, but I'm not going to calculate that payment based on the 101. I'm going to be calculating it simply on the loan amount, not including the closing fees. And that's how we're going to get to this. We're going to say that we'll pick up that amount and then enter. And I didn't put a negative somewhere. I'm going to double click. Notice whenever you do this with these present value formulas and you don't get an item, you might need a negative number. We need one in the payment field, I believe. So I'm going to put one negative right there in the payment and enter. Now we need to make it an absolute reference. Go into the number group, percentifying it. I'm not an absolute reference. We need to make it a percent. And then add some decimals. So we'll add some decimals there. Now this is the monthly rate. Now we'll make it the APR for the year. APR yearly. And I'll just multiply that times 12. So I'm going to say this equals the monthly rate times 12 to give us the yearly rate. And then we can go to the numbers group percent, add some decimals. So if I wrap the costs into the APR as a percent format, we're now at the 710. So that's useful. Now, it doesn't help me to really calculate the table over here in our amortization table, and that's why it's kind of useful to actually calculate the amortization table, but it helps me if I'm comparing some other loan that has a different mix between the costs in terms of the fees they're charging and the interest. That's going to be basically the idea. Now, you can kind of double check this if you were to plug the numbers into like a loan calculator like this. You can look up multiple loan calculators. This is a fairly simple calculator. They can get quite complex, right? But the loan amount, 100,000, the term 30, we got the 7% is the interest rate, not the APR monthly. We pay every month. And now we've got the loan fees, which we're going to add to the loan balance. And here's our balance. We get the APR of the 7.099, which looks like we got the 7 point, if I add another decimal, 7.099, they took it out another decimal. And then we've got the payments every month, the 671.96, which is the added payment, 671.96. And we have the total 360 payments, the 241.903, which should be at our bottom number here. Total payments down here, 241.904 about. We're doing the abouts there, 241.90, and then the interest, the 141.903. So 141.903. And so the interest is total interest, 141. I think they're including the fees there, all payment and fees. So I think that includes the fees. So if I had the interest we calculated plus the 141 that we have there. And you can also have some of these tables, these online ones, they'll give you an amortization table. So you can kind of check your amortization table as well, or use this to calculate your amortization table. Again, different calculators have different pros and cons on them and different features and comparisons. So that's going to be the general idea, and that's kind of the idea with the APR in general. We're trying to you might need to annualize something to have the same period to the same period on the rate, and then try to roll in the interest to a percent that you can compare one to the other. Now, even this is not perfect, because if you're keeping the loan, like if you're buying a home for 30 years and you're going to live in it for the whole 30 years, then your lower APR is a pretty safe number generally. But if you're planning to move in the middle or sooner than that, then the question is, well, if I'm putting $1,000 up front versus some other loan where they have a higher interest rate, but I'm not tacking it, they're not just picking up that money up front, then which would be better in that case? So if you're not planning on keeping the loan for the whole loan period, the 30 years in this case, even though you're picking up a 30-year loan, then you still might want to do another calculation further breaking down which might be better given the fact that you're holding it for a shorter period than the loan term.